Introduction. Welcome to KD Starlow, British audio fiction. Tonight's story is called Something Worth Keeping. In the werewolf world, a fated mate bond is considered sacred, a pull no wolf is supposed to walk away from. Damian Ashford walks away from his anyway. He rejects Ivy in front of the Pack Council, formally on record, because Olivia Blackwell brings better political connections than a mid-ranking wolf with no useful family name. He expects her to fall apart. Ivy Ashford doesn't fall apart. She thanks him for showing her exactly who he is, and she walks out of that hall with her chin up. What Damian doesn't know is that she's carrying his children, twins, and she has no intention of ever telling him. This is a story about what a woman builds when she stops waiting to be chosen and starts choosing for herself, and about what happens 9 years later, when the man who threw her away comes looking for what he still thinks belongs to him. Something worth keeping. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Meeting Hall. The stone walls of the Ashford Pack meeting hall had witnessed centuries of werewolf tradition, but Ivy doubted they'd ever seen anything quite like this. She stood before the council table with her spine straight and her chin lifted, refusing to give Damian Ashford the satisfaction of seeing her cower. The alpha sat at the centre of the long oak table, flanked by the pack elders. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his suit immaculate. Everything about him spoke of power and privilege, from the ancestral ring on his finger to the way he looked at her now, cold and dismissive. Olivia Blackwell stood beside him, her manicured hand resting possessively on his shoulder. Beautiful in that polished, untouchable way old money produced, blonde hair falling in perfect waves, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Ivy Crawford," Damian began, his voice carrying through the hall with practiced authority. "I, Damian Ashford, alpha of the Ashford Pack, formally reject you as my fated mate before these witnesses and under the eyes of the moon goddess." The words should have shattered her. The mate bond, still new and fragile between them, should have torn like tissue paper. Ivy felt the pull, the instinctive cry of her wolf to fight this, to beg him to reconsider. But she had always been better at controlling her instincts than other wolves. She'd had a lot of practice over the years. She let the silence stretch, watching Damian's jaw tighten as she deliberately made him wait for her to respond. He was waiting for her to break, waiting for the tears, the pleading, the dramatic collapse that would validate his decision and make him feel more powerful. Instead, she smiled mockingly at him. "Well," Ivy said, her voice steady and almost amused, "that was certainly formal, Damian. Did you rehearse it in a mirror, or does being a pompous arse just come naturally to you?" One of the elders, old Thomas Greaves, made a choking sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Damian's eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising to the surface, furious at her mockery. "You will show respect," he growled. "How dare you speak to me like that?" "Respect?" Ivy tilted her head, still smiling. "Damian, you just rejected your fated mate in front of the entire council because Olivia's family has better political connections and more money. I think we're just a tad past respect, don't you?" Olivia's fingers tightened on Damian's shoulder. "How dare you?" she started. Ivy cut her off. "Oh, I dare quite a lot, actually." Ivy turned to the blonde woman, pleasant and unhurried. "Congratulations. I'm sure you'll both be very happy as two people can be when they've chosen status over the goddess's will." "The goddess's will isn't always practical," Damian said, his voice tight. "The pack needs strong alliances," he continued. "The Blackwell connection secures our position in the Northern Territories for generations to come. And I'm just a mid-ranking wolf with no useful family connections," Ivy finished for him. "Yes, I'm aware of that. You've made it abundantly clear these past few weeks." She'd seen it coming, if she was honest with herself. The way he'd grown distant after the initial excitement of discovering they were fated mates. The questions about her family, her position, her usefulness to his ambitions. She'd hoped she was wrong, but Ivy had never been good at lying to herself. "You're taking this remarkably well," Damian said, something suspicious creeping into his tone. Most wolves would be devastated at being rejected by their fated mate. "Did you want me devastated? Is that what this is about? You need me to fall apart so you can feel better about your choice to dump me?" she asked him curiously. "I expected you to show some emotion. The mate bond, it's sacred," he started to say. "The mate bond is a suggestion, not a command," Ivy interrupted. "The goddess puts two souls together and says, 'Here you are. You could be good for each other.' She doesn't force us to accept it. You've made your choice, and honestly, Damian, I think you've done me a favour." That got his attention. His eyes narrowed, his wolf prowling beneath the surface. "A favour? What do you mean?" "Absolutely a favour." Ivy clasped her hands, the picture of composure. "I thought I was getting a mate, a partner, someone who'd choose me every day, not because fate said so, but because he wanted to. Instead, I got a man who treats relationships like business transactions and people like assets to be kept or discarded, depending on their use." She took a step forward, and several of the elders leaned in to listen despite themselves. "So yes, thank you for showing me exactly who you are before we completed the bond. Thank you for proving you're not strong enough to stand against pack politics. Thank you for being exactly the kind of alpha I'd never want to tie myself to for the rest of my life." Damian stood abruptly, his chair scraping the stone floor. "You forget yourself, Ivy. I'm your alpha." "You were my alpha," Ivy corrected, "but I think we both know I won't be staying in this pack after today. I accept your rejection, Damian. Fully. Absolutely fully. I sever the bond between us myself and release you to enjoy your politically advantageous marriage. I hope you'll both be very happy." She felt it snap, a sharp pain in her chest that made her wolf whimper. But Ivy had been hurt before, and she'd learned long ago that pain was temporary. Dignity was forever. "I hope she gives you everything you're looking for," she said, and meant it. "I hope the alliance is worth it. I hope you build your empire and become the most powerful alpha in the North." She turned to leave, then paused, looking back. "But I also hope that someday, lying next to your politically perfect wife, Damian, that you remember this moment. Remember the woman who could have loved you for who you are, not what you could give her. Remember that you had something real, and you traded it for something shiny." "You'll regret this," Damian said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You'll regret walking away, Ivy. I was quite happy to allow you to stay in the pack." Ivy laughed, bright and genuine in the somber hall. "Oh, Damian, the only thing I regret is not seeing this coming sooner. Don't worry about me. I'll be just fine." She walked towards the heavy wooden doors. No one tried to stop her. The elders watched with expressions ranging from shock to grudging respect. Olivia looked furious, as though Ivy's composure had stolen a victory she'd been owed. At the doors, old Thomas Greaves called after her. "Where will you go, girl?" She turned back one last time, her smile radiant. "Somewhere I'm chosen, Thomas, not settled for." Then Ivy Ashford walked out of the meeting hall, with her head held high and her heart intact, leaving behind an alpha who'd spend a long time wondering if he'd made the worst mistake of his life. She didn't look back. Chapter 2, 3 weeks later. The bathroom tiles were cold against Ivy's bare feet. She stared at the plastic stick in her hand, watching the second pink line appear with cruel clarity. Her reflection looked pale, dark hair pulled back in a messy knot, eyes wide with something not quite panic yet, but getting perilously close. Pregnant. With Damian Ashford's child. No. Children. Her wolf knew it instinctively, could sense 2 tiny heartbeats already forming. Twins. "Bloody hell," Ivy whispered. Her voice sounded strange in the small bathroom of her London flat. She'd moved here 2 weeks ago, a one-bedroom in Shoreditch, found through a friend of a friend. Not much, but hers. Away from the pack. Away from Damian and his perfect political marriage. She set the test on the edge of the sink and gripped the porcelain with both hands until her knuckles went white. For a moment, she let herself feel the full weight of it. The fear, the uncertainty, the sense that her carefully constructed escape had just become infinitely more complicated. Then she straightened her spine, looked herself in the eye, and told herself, "Right, you can do this, Ivy." Pack law on rejected mates wasn't as settled as people like to pretend, and Ashford tradition read it more aggressively than most councils did. She'd grown up hearing the elders talk about blood claims. The old conviction and Alpha's heirs belonged to his pack, whatever had happened between the parents. Under Ashford customs, a father's claim to his own blood could survive a rejection even when the mother's standing didn't. If Damian found out she was carrying twins, an Ashford council stacked with his own elders would very likely find a way to hand them to him, formally rejected mate or not. She'd lose her babies. So she wouldn't tell him. She wouldn't tell anyone from the pack about her pregnancy. She thought of her grandmother, Margaret Thorne, who'd left her own pack to marry a human man and never once regretted it. Thorne. She could be Ivy Thorne. A new name for a new life. A new life for 2 new lives. She walked to the window. The city stretched before her, a million lights in the dark. Somewhere out there was her future. It wouldn't be easy, but Ivy had never experienced easy. There was a version of the next few months she could already see clearly if she let herself. Registering with a doctor under a name that wasn't hers yet. Finding a job that didn't ask too many questions about references. Learning to budget for 2 of everything on 1 income in a city that didn't care whether she managed it or not. None of it would be easy. But Ivy had spent her whole life being underestimated by people who mistook her composure for softness, and she found, standing at that window with her hands still shaking slightly, that she was almost looking forward to proving them wrong from a very great distance. She just needed possible. And this, terrifying as it was, felt possible. Chapter 3. Building a New Life. The twins arrived on a wet Thursday in March, 6 weeks after Ivy had landed a junior position at a brand consultancy in Clerkenwell, 3 weeks after she'd legally become Ivy Thorne, and 1 day after she'd finished assembling a second-hand cot that had taken 4 hours and 2 YouTube tutorials to assemble. Noah came first, furious and loud. Ellie followed 11 minutes later, quieter, her eyes already open and watching. Ivy held one in each arm in the hospital bed and felt something shift in her chest so completely she could barely breathe. This was it. This was the whole point of her existence, she decided in that moment. The first year was brutal, in the way only sleep deprivation and single parenthood can be brutal. She went back to work at 4 months, found a childminder 2 streets away, and learned to write client reports one-handed at midnight on her second-hand laptop. There were nights she sat on the bathroom floor and cried from sheer exhaustion. There were mornings Noah laughed at something she did, or Ellie reached for her with both arms. Then she remembered with fierce clarity why she was living this way. Her children were happy, safe. Hers. She built her career the way she built everything, one deliberate step at a time. By year 2, she'd been promoted twice. By year 3, she had her first freelance clients. By year 4, she'd handed in her notice and launched Thorne Consulting from her kitchen table, terrified and certain in equal measures about growing her own business. It grew because Ivy understood something her competitors missed. People didn't just want to look good. They wanted to be seen accurately, understood for what they actually were, rather than what was easiest to project. She knew exactly how that felt, having spent years being assessed and found wanting by people who never bothered to look at her properly. By year 5, she'd taken on her first 2 employees, both women who'd left agencies for reasons they didn't fully explain and didn't need to. By the time the twins started primary school, Thorne Consulting had 6 employees and an office in Islington. Ivy had learned to read a balance sheet as fluently as she'd once read pack politics, which turned out to be a more useful skill than anyone had thought to tell her. Noah started asking for atlases for Christmas. Ellie started correcting the television whenever a nature documentary got a fact wrong, which was often enough that Ivy had learned to check her own certainty before contradicting her. They were, by any measure Ivy trusted, turning into exactly the sort of little people she'd have wanted to raise. By the time they turned 7, they'd all outgrown the Shoreditch flat, and Ivy bought a house in Stoke Newington with a garden and a spare room she turned into a proper office. She stood in the empty hallway on moving day, with Noah on one hip, Ellie holding her hand, and felt something she hadn't felt since the night she'd crossed the county line away from Ashford territory. Completely, quietly, unambiguously free, and very happy. She didn't date, not really. A colleague asked, a neighbour, a very persistent man from Noah's football club. She always declined. Told herself it was because she was busy. The truth was more complicated. Part of her didn't trust the instincts that had once pulled her toward Damian so completely. Part of her, the part examined least of all, was afraid of what it would mean to let someone in and have them decide she wasn't worth keeping. But she was happy. Genuinely, surprisingly happy. Her children, her work, her independence. It turned out those 3 things stacked together made a life she was proud of. For a long time, it was enough. Chapter 4. The Conference. She met Callum Reid at a brand strategy conference in Edinburgh when the twins were 7. He was speaking on a panel about authentic leadership, which she'd gone to see out of professional interest and stayed for, because he was the only panellist who said anything that surprised and actually interested her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dark red hair, and the kind of stillness that came from being genuinely comfortable in his own skin. Not the practiced calm of an alpha working a room. Just a man who didn't feel the need to fill silences unnecessarily. She noticed it immediately, having grown up around pack hierarchy, having spent her childhood watching wolves posture for whoever was in the room. This was something else. She caught his scent in the coffee queue afterwards. Wolf. Alpha. But something clean and steady, pine and cold water, that didn't make her hackles rise or her wolf retreat. He smelled of safety, warmth and comfort. He caught her scent at the same moment, and they both went very still. 2 lone wolves recognizing each other in a room full of humans and other werewolves. Ivy Thorne, she said, extending her hand. I liked what you said about authenticity being a strategic choice rather than a personality trait. Callum Reid. His handshake was firm and brief. I liked your question about brand consistency under pressure. Best thing anyone asked all day, he said. They had coffee, then dinner, because neither wanted the conversation to end. He ran an architectural firm in Glasgow, built from nothing after leaving his birth pack in the Highlands 6 years earlier. He spoke about it plainly, without drama. He'd grown up in a pack that valued hierarchy over everything, had spent his 20s trying to be the alpha his father wanted rather than the man he actually was, and had eventually accepted that some lives need to be built from scratch rather than inherited. I'm not a lone wolf by nature, he said, turning his wineglass between his hands. I like belonging to something. It just needed to be the right something. Have you found that yet? He looked at her steadily. I'm starting to think I might. She told him about the twins over dinner. She'd learned to do it early with anyone she might actually like, to watch how they responded. Some people went politely vague, some tried too hard. Callum just asked questions. What were they like? What did they love? What made them difficult? She talked for 40 minutes about Noah's maps and Ellie's habit of cross-examining anyone who said something factually suspect. And he listened with genuine attention, laughing in the right places, asking follow-up questions that proved he'd actually heard her. You didn't ask me about their father, Ivy said, when she noticed he'd not mentioned it. You'll tell me when you want to, he said simply. It's none of my business yet. She told him anyway. Not everything, but enough. Fated mate, rejection. The choice she'd made to leave rather than fight for a man who'd already decided she wasn't worth keeping. She'd told this story before, in fragments, to colleagues and the one friend who knew the whole of it, and she'd learned to watch for the particular flavour of discomfort it produced in many people. The flinch, the too careful sympathy, the faint and unspoken question of what she might have done to provoke a rejection like that. Callum didn't do any of that. He watched her face as she spoke. There was no pity in his, and no judgment either. Just anger, banked and controlled entirely on her behalf. He rejected his fated mate for a political alliance, Callum said. Yes. And you raised his children alone for over 7 years, he asked quietly. Yes. And he doesn't know. No, and I'd like to keep it that way if you don't mind. Callum nodded slowly. Understood. He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him actually weighing something, not freestyling a good line, but genuinely working through what it might cost him, loving a woman an alpha might one day come looking for. He weighed it thoroughly and didn't flinch. For what it's worth, he said, I think you're remarkable. And I'd very much like to see you again. I live in London, she said. You live in Glasgow. Trains exist, so do phones, and I've been looking for a reason to expand into the London market. She smiled despite herself. That's a lot of effort just to see me again. You're worth a lot of effort, he said, with no theatre to it at all, as though reporting a fact. I'd like the chance to prove it. Ivy looked at this man who'd sat across from her for 3 hours, asking about her children rather than around them, who'd heard about her past and answered with anger on her behalf rather than calculation about what it meant for him. She thought about 7 years of managing everything alone. All right, she said. 1 chance. He turned out not to need more than that 1 chance. Chapter 5. A Chosen Family. Callum came to London the following weekend, bringing a football for Noah because Ivy had mentioned in passing that he loved it, and a puzzle book for Ellie because she liked things that made her think hard. Ivy watched him sit on the living room floor, explaining the offside rule to her son, then shift straight into answering Ellie's first question about why puzzles were satisfying, and felt something loosen in her chest she hadn't known was tight. He didn't try to be their friend too quickly. He was just present, honest and interested. He treated them like people rather than obstacles to a relationship with their mother, and they responded the way children do to adults who take them seriously. By his 4th visit, Noah was showing him maps. By the 6th, Ellie was cross-examining him about architecture, and he was answering with full attention and no condescension. He's all right, Mum, Noah said one evening after Callum had driven back to his hotel. We like him. From Noah, who withheld approval until he was certain it was deserved. This was significant. Yes, Ivy agreed. He is, isn't he? 6 months after Edinburgh, Callum sat down with the twins while Ivy made tea and pretended not to listen from the kitchen. He explained simply that he loved their mum and wanted to be part of the family if they'd have him. That nothing changed about who they were or where they belonged. That he wasn't trying to replace anyone. Ellie asked 3 clarifying questions. Noah asked if this meant Callum would come to more football matches. Everyone I can make, Callum said. Okay then, Noah said, and went back to watching the TV. Ellie looked at her brother, then back at Callum. You can stay, she announced, with the air of someone who'd reached a verdict after careful deliberation. Ivy stood in the kitchen doorway with tears on her face and felt, for the first time in 8 years, that the shape of her life was exactly right. 2 weeks before the bonding ceremony, Callum sat across from her at the kitchen table with a folder of paperwork and an expression she hadn't seen on him before, careful and deliberate. I want to adopt them properly, he said. Not just take your word that I'm in this. On record, through the council, so there's no questions later. Later meaning if Damian ever finds out about them? She asked. Yes. He didn't dress it up. I thought about what that could actually mean. An alpha who's used to getting what he wants, coming after my family. It's not nothing, Ivy. I want you to know I've weighed it properly, not just decided on this without thinking it through. And? She asked, looking at him. And I'm not walking away from 3 people I love because your ex might eventually cause trouble. He held her gaze. I looked into what the law actually says, too. Talked to a solicitor who specialises in Caledonian registration. A rejection, formalised in front of witnesses, ends the rejecting party's claim on anything that follows, children included. Ashford's own counsel might read it differently if it ever came to it. They've always favoured blood claims, but the Caledonian Council doesn't work that way. 300 years of precedent. If we do this properly, through them, it holds. Ivy sat with that a moment. You've been planning this. I've been protecting my family, Callum said. Same thing. They completed the application together the following week, sitting in a Caledonian Council registration office in Glasgow, while a registrar checked the paperwork line by line. Ivy answered questions about the rejection with a steadiness that surprised her. When it was done, Callum looked at the stamped forms for a long moment. Both of us on record, he said. No ambiguity. Ivy felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for 8 years. She and her children were finally safe. They bonded formally the following month, a quiet ceremony with just his sister and Ivy's oldest London friend Clara as witnesses. No pack politics, no council hall, no centuries of tradition pressing down on the room. Just 2 people choosing each other in a solicitor's garden in Islington on a warm September afternoon, while Noah and Ellie sat on a wall eating crisps and arguing cheerfully about something entirely unrelated. There was no goddess invoked, no formal recitation of the kind Damian had used to reject her 9 years before. Callum simply took her hands and said he chose her, all of her, the parts that were easy and the parts that had come with a cost he'd weighed and accepted with open eyes, and that he intended to keep choosing her for as long as she'd let him. Ivy said something similar back, though she couldn't afterwards remember the exact words, only the feeling of a bond settling into place that owed nothing to fate and everything to 2 people who'd looked at each other clearly and decided on each other. She kissed him afterwards and didn't say anything else, because there wasn't anything adequate to say. Chapter 6. 9 years on from the rejection. Olivia Ashford had spent 9 years learning patience. It was one of the few things her marriage had actually taught her. She'd told herself for a long time that a powerful alliance was a reasonable foundation for a life, even without warmth. What she hadn't planned for was the shape the coldness would eventually take. Damian wanted an heir with an urgency that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with legacy. And as the nursery at Ashford Manor stayed empty year after year, that urgency curdled into blame. The consultations were always framed around her, her cycle, her body. He never once suggested the problem might sit with him, and when her own doctor gently raised the possibility, he refused point blank to be tested. That refusal was what finally sent Olivia to an investigator, not for Damian's secrets, but her own peace of mind. She wanted proof, one way or another, of where the fault actually lay, something she could hold on to the next time he looked at her like a defective asset. She'd married him with her eyes open, she'd told herself so many times it had almost stopped feeling like a lie. Political marriages were common enough in pack circles, and she'd gone in expecting a partnership rather than a romance, comfortable enough with the trade. What she hadn't expected was to spend 9 years being quietly, methodically blamed for a failure that increasingly looked like it wasn't hers at all. The investigator came back with something she hadn't asked for. Ivy Thorne, formerly Ivy Crawford, had 2 children. Twins, aged 8, both registered as the legal children of an alpha called Callum Reed. Olivia sat with the report for a long time before she worked out what to do with it. She could have burnt it, left it alone. Instead, she carried it to Damian's study and set it on his desk without a word, because some part of her already knew what his reaction would tell her, and she needed to see it before she let herself decide what she was going to do moving forward. He read it in silence. She watched shock move through his face, then disbelief, then something colder that told her everything about the state of their marriage. Not guilt, not even curiosity about the woman he'd rejected. Just want, raw and entirely fixed on what those children represented. "Twins," he said. "I have 2 children I knew nothing about. How dare she take my children away from me?" 8 years old, Olivia said. "So the fault was probably mine, wasn't it?" She paused. "I'll say it for you, Damian, before you slip it into the conversation." He didn't answer her. He was already reaching for his phone. "I'm going to claim them." He said it coldly. "I want my children here with me. They're mine." That was the answer in the end. Not the one about the fertility clinic, the one about what he'd actually wanted all along, which had never once been her. She'd given him 9 years and her family's political weight, and the closest thing to loyalty a marriage like theirs could produce, and none of it had earned so much as a flicker of concern or gratitude for what she'd just handed him. Only hunger, aimed entirely past her, at 2 children he'd never met. Olivia went upstairs, packed with the calm of a woman who'd been rehearsing this exit longer than she'd admitted to herself, and called her sister. She didn't look back either. She was done with Adrian and his pack. Chapter 7. The Office Altercation. Ivy was in a client presentation when her assistant knocked and came in wearing the expression reserved for situations requiring immediate adult supervision. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, Ivy. There's a man downstairs who won't leave. Says his name is Damian Ashford. He needs to speak with you urgently." The room went very quiet inside Ivy's head. She excused herself from the clients, walked to the corridor, and stood with her back against the wall, breathing steadily. 9 years of building a life that had nothing to do with Damian Ashford, and here he was in her own building. Her wolf rose in cold fury rather than fear. She pressed it down. "Tell him I'll be down in 10 minutes. Put him in the small meeting room. Stay at the desk outside. Don't let him roam around." She checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror. "You've handled worse," she told herself grimly. Damian was standing at the window when she came in, his back to the door. He turned when he heard her, and for just a moment, brief enough that she might have imagined it, something crossed his face that wasn't calculation. Something almost like the man she'd thought she'd known before she really got to know him. It was gone before she could be sure of it, folded back under the entitlement that had long since replaced it. She sat down without offering him a seat. "How did you find me?" "Does it matter?" he replied coldly. "It matters quite a lot. I'll be speaking to my solicitor about it." She folded her hands on the table and let the silence sit for a moment before she continued, because she'd learned in 9 years of client negotiations that the person who spoke first in haste usually lost something. "You have 5 minutes. I'd use them efficiently," she said calmly. "You had my children." He said it almost like an accusation. "I had children. They're mine." "They're my blood, Ivy. My heirs. You had no right." "I had every right, Damian." Her voice stayed entirely level. "You stood in front of the Pack Council and rejected me. You severed our bond in front of witnesses. What I did after that is none of your concern. You were carrying my children. You should have told me. I had the right to know about them," he said angrily. He was nearly shouting at her. "I didn't know I was pregnant when you rejected me, Damian. And when I found out, I made a decision that kept them away from a man who treats people as assets." She tilted her head. "How's Olivia? Is she well?" Something flickered across his face. "That's not. Because she isn't here, is she? which tells me that conversation's already happened. And I'm guessing the reason you've suddenly remembered I exist is because your politically advantageous marriage didn't deliver any children. She paused. Am I right, Damian? He didn't answer her. She stood. So no. You don't get to reject me, choose someone else, and come back 9 years later to claim what I built without you. They're Ashford blood, Damian said, alpha command starting to surface in his voice. Pack law gives me rights to my own children. My children are registered as the legal children of Callum Reid under Caledonian Council records. My husband adopted them formally through the council a few months ago. Whatever claim you think bloodline gives you, his supersedes it. She moved to the door. And even if it didn't, I'd fight you through every court available. I have the resources for that now. You made sure of it. I'll go to the Ashford Council, challenge the Reid registration. Those children have Ashford blood. You rejected their mother, Ivy said quietly, in front of witnesses. Under Pack law, that severs everything. Any council worth its salt will tell you the same. She opened the door. If I see you near my children, I'll call the police and the council simultaneously. I'd advise against testing me, Damian. He left. She stood in the empty meeting room for 30 seconds, letting her hands shake privately where no one could see, then called Callum. He found us, she said when he answered. He's been here, demanding I give him the twins. A beat of silence, then his voice, quiet and absolutely certain. Are you all right, Ivy? Yes, I handled it. But he won't let this go, Cal. I know him. He'll escalate it as far as he can. Then we get ahead of it. I'm calling the council tonight. Everything on record formally. Where are the kids? School. Safe. Good. I'm coming down this weekend. A pause. Ivy. He doesn't get them. I promise he won't get them. She believed it. That was the thing about Callum. He said things because he meant them. I know, she said. I'll see you Friday. I love you, Callum. Chapter 8. Thursday at school. Ivy knew something was wrong before she turned onto the school street. Her wolf felt it first. 3 men positioned in a loose perimeter around the school gate, none of them parents, all of them carrying Ashford territory on their scent under a heavy layer of expensive aftershave. She turned her car into the teacher's car park behind the school, parked it, then texted Callum. Ashford wolves at the school. 3, maybe more. Don't call. I need to see and hear what's happening. His reply came back in seconds. I'm already on my way home. I was going to surprise you all. I'm 30 minutes away. Keep them inside if you can. That school is like Fort Knox. They'll be safe. She texted the school office next, asking them to ensure they released the twins to no one but her. Despite what anyone said who came in to try and collect them, the office confirmed straight away their own policies would forbid that if they weren't on the pickup schedule. Good. The children were contained, safe in their classroom. She walked toward the gate anyway, because someone needed to see her do it. The nearest enforcer stepped into her path, big, flat-eyed, professional. Mrs. Reid, Alpha Ashford would like a word with you. He had his word yesterday. He got his answer. It's still no. She said it coldly. He wants to meet his children, Mrs. Reid. He doesn't have any children enrolled at this school, so I have no idea who he wants to meet. She kept walking. You're on public property outside a primary school, she said. Move, or I'm calling the police. His hand closed round her upper arm before she'd finished the sentence. He was obviously prepared to drag her towards wherever Damian was waiting, despite the audience of parents starting to notice. Her wolf came up hard and vicious. 9 years of careful control meant nothing against a stranger's grip outside her children's school, and she twisted out of it in one sharp motion, breaking free rather than fighting, and didn't look back to see if he followed her. She reached the entrance as the bell rang. A teaching assistant who'd noticed the altercation with the enforcer held the door for her, then quickly locked it behind her. Call the police, Ivy said, catching her breath. Tell them there are men outside behaving aggressively, and one of them just grabbed a parent. They're going to try and take my children. The assistant was already dialing. Ivy found Noah and Ellie in their classroom, bewildered and a little frightened at not being allowed to leave. She crouched in front of them, hands on their shoulders. We're leaving by the back, she said quietly, walking very quickly to the car. Are you both all right? What's happening? Ellie asked, dark eyes serious. Some people your dad and I are having a disagreement with made a bad decision, Ivy said. Dad's coming. We just need to get to the car. The head teacher appeared, alarmed but composed, and led them through the building to the back car park where she'd left her car. Raised voices carried from the front of the school, and the distant wail of a siren. Ivy didn't look back. She had the twins in the car and was pulling out of the back car park when a black Range Rover swung in to block the exit. Damian got out before it had fully stopped. Ivy, stop. His alpha command, the dominance he rarely had to use because most wolves folded without it. Get out of the car, he demanded. Move your vehicle, Ivy said through the window, or I drive through it. Those are my children, he said angrily. I've come to collect them and take them home where they belong. They're my children, and my husband's, and you're committing a criminal offence on school property. Move the car. From the back seat, Noah's voice, furious and trying not to shake. You're the man who hurt our mum. Damian's expression cracked for just a moment. He took a step toward the car, looking at them both eagerly. A second vehicle appeared, and Callum was out of it before it had properly stopped, drawing gasps from the parents gathering at the edge of the car park. He got there much faster than she'd expected. He placed himself between Damian and Ivy's car, with a stillness that read as more dangerous than shouting would have been. Callum Reed, Caledonian Council Registration 4471. Those are my children, and that is my wife. Step away from the vehicle now, he commanded. Damian was half a head taller and broader across the shoulders, alpha of one of the largest packs in the north for 15 years. None of it seemed to register with Callum as relevant. You have no claim to them, Damian said to him. They are my biological children. I have every legal claim, and the police are already on their way. Callum's voice didn't rise. This is over, Ashford. Walk away before you cause even more damage. They're my blood, Damian shouted. I have every right to them. They're my kids, Callum said simply. Walk away, now. The sirens were audible now. Damian's driver said something urgent through the window. The enforcer who'd grabbed Ivy at the gate appeared at his shoulder and whispered something in his ear. She watched him assess the situation and quietly conclude it had gone badly and they needed to get away before the police turned up and started asking questions they'd rather not answer. Damian looked at the car. At Callum, standing between him and the children, something immovable. He got back in the Range Rover. It reversed and was gone before the first police car came round the corner of the building. An officer took statements from Ivy, from the head teacher, from the teaching assistant who'd held the door. Another spoke to a cluster of parents who'd seen the enforcer grab her arm and were, to Ivy's quiet gratitude, entirely willing to testify to. Noah and Ellie sat in the back of Callum's car, with a blanket someone had produced from somewhere, watching the whole scene with the particular wide-eyed stillness of children absorbing something they'd need time to properly understand. Is he going to come back? Ellie asked, when Ivy finally climbed in beside them. No, Callum said, before Ivy could answer, and there was nothing rehearsed in the certainty of it. He isn't, because Mum and I won't allow it. He was still angry, she could see it in the set of his jaw, controlled the way it always was, but still there. He'd dropped everything the moment she'd texted him, and it showed. Chapter 9. The Ruling. The Caledonian Council convened on a Saturday in a function room above a hotel in York, which Ivy felt struck exactly the right balance between neutral ground and unglamorous practicality. 12 council members, a legal recorder, and one very senior arbitrator named Elder May Sutherland, who had apparently been settling pack disputes since before Damian's father was born. Damian arrived with 2 pack elders and a solicitor. Ivy arrived with Callum, her own solicitor, and the documentation they'd assembled together, their bonding certificate, the joint adoption application, the police report from Thursday, and a formal statement from the school. Elder Sutherland reviewed all of it without expression, then asked Damian 3 questions and listened to his answers with the air of a woman who'd heard every version of self-justification and found none of them particularly novel. "Alpha Ashford," she said, when he'd finished making his case. "Did you formally reject Ivy Crawford as your fated mate in front of the Ashford Pack Council approximately 9 years ago?" "Yes, but..." "Did you then marry another woman?" "Yes, but the circumstances..." He tried again. "And did you make any attempt to locate your former mate in the 9 years since, to see if she was in good health, or even perhaps to check if she'd been pregnant when she left?" A pause. "No." "No," Elder Sutherland agreed. "You rejected her. You moved on, and you forgot she existed until you discovered she had something you wanted." She set down her pen. "Pack law on rejected mates is not ambiguous under this council. When a bond is formally severed, the rejecting party releases all claims on the rejected party. All claims. I'll note for the record that Ashford custom has historically read blood claims more generously than this council does. That's a matter for the Ashford Pack to examine internally, not one this council will indulge. Under Caledonian precedent, 300 years of it, the rejecting party's claim ends the moment the rejection is formalised. "They carry my bloodline," Damian said. "Surely that counts for something." "Many children carry bloodlines their biological fathers have no legal claim to. Bloodline hasn't been the sole determinant of parenthood under this council's law for 3 centuries. Elder Sutherland turned to the registration documents. "These children are the legal children of Callum Reed, who bonded with their mother formally and completed a joint adoption through this council's own procedures. That registration is valid. It stands." "I'm challenging it," Damian shouted angrily. "On what grounds?" asked Elder Sutherland. "That they carry Ashford blood, and I wasn't informed of their existence." "You weren't informed because you rejected their mother," Elder Sutherland said, with a patience that carried something very close to contempt. "You had a claim, arguably, if you'd pursued it in the immediate aftermath of the rejection. You chose not to, because you didn't know about the pregnancy and, frankly, because you'd moved on. The law doesn't reward 9 years of inaction followed by a change of circumstances on the part of the person who chose to reject their fated mate." Damian's solicitor leaned in and murmured something. He shook his head, waving her off. "What about my right to know my own children?" he shouted. "No one in this room disputes that you're their biological father. What I'm telling you is that biology, unaccompanied by any legal or practical relationship with the children in question, doesn't override the legal parenthood of a man who's been their father in every meaningful sense for more than a year. Noah and Ellie Reed have a father. They have a family. You disrupted that family by sending enforcers to a primary school and laying hands on their mother." She picked up her pen. "I'm issuing a formal sanction against the Ashford Pack. Thursday's incident and the police report will be entered against Ashford's standing with this council for the coming term. I'm confirming the Reed registration as valid and unchallenged, and I'm directing that Damian Ashford have no contact with Ivy Reed, Callum Reed, or their children without the written consent of both parents." She looked up. "If there's a next time, Alpha Ashford, it won't just stop at a sanction." Damian stood. His solicitor touched his arm, and he shook her off. He looked at Ivy across the table for a long moment. "You could have told me," he said. "Things would have been different. I'd have taken you back." "No," Ivy said. "They wouldn't. You showed me exactly who you were before I knew I was pregnant. I made my decision based on that. I'd never have returned to you, Damian." Her voice stayed level, not cold, just clear. I hope you build something worth having, Damian. I genuinely do. But it won't be with my children. Not ever. He left without another word. His elders followed. His solicitor gathered her papers and didn't look at anyone. Elder Sutherland paused beside Ivy on her way out. You've done well, both of you. Thank you, Elder Sutherland, Ivy said. Don't thank me. The law did what it's supposed to do. She glanced at Callum. Not always the case. Today it did, and I'm pleased it did. Then she was gone, and it was just the two of them in the emptied room. Callum put his arm around Ivy's shoulders, and for the first time, she let herself feel the relief properly. It's done, he said. It's done, she agreed. Chapter 10. Something Worth Keeping. The twins took the news that Damian Ashford existed and that they shared his blood about as well as two children raised to think clearly and not waste energy on things that didn't matter could be expected to. Noah's only real question was whether this changed anything about football season. Told it didn't, he asked for toast and rather hopefully afterwards some jam on it. Ellie sat with it longer. 3 days of careful, occasional questions, then found Callum reading in the kitchen one evening. Did you know he might come back when you chose us to be your children, Dad? I knew it was possible, Callum said. Your mum told me everything before we were serious. It didn't change my answer or what I wanted. Why not? Because you were already worth whatever came with you. He set his book down properly. He could have been your dad and wasn't. I wasn't supposed to be, and I am. That's just how it worked out. Ellie considered this with the focus she brought to anything she was genuinely working through, then nodded, apparently satisfied, and went to bed with some cocoa. Ivy found Callum still in the kitchen later. She made tea, and they sat without talking for a while, which was one of the things she'd never had with anyone before him, the ability to be quiet together without it meaning anything was wrong. Do you think he'll try again? She asked eventually. No, Callum said. The sanction has cost him politically, and another attempt would cost him a great deal more. Elder Sutherland was fairly clear about what happens next time. She was magnificent, wasn't she? So were you. He looked at her properly. You were terrified of that school gate, and you put yourself between those men and our children anyway, and held the line until I got there. That's not the absence of fear. That's just what it looks like when it's called bravery. Ivy wrapped both hands around her mug. Outside, the garden was dark, the lights of Stoke Newington glowing low over the rooftops. 9 years ago, she'd stood in a bathroom in Shoreditch and stared at 2 pink lines and made a decision that had felt, at the time, like the end of everything she knew. It had been. And what had replaced it was so much better than what she'd lost that she still sometimes couldn't quite account for how it had happened. I want to look at schools in Glasgow, she said, for next term. If we're doing this properly. Are you sure? He asked, squeezing her hand gently. The kids are ready. The business runs from anywhere now. She met his eyes. I'm done, splitting myself between 2 places, Callum. I've had enough. I want to be with you all the time, living in the same house. She paused. And I'd like to try for another baby, Callum, if that's what you'd like as well. He took her hand across the table. I can't think of anything more perfect, he murmured. The bond between them settled warm and steady, nothing at all like the one that had snapped in a meeting hall 9 years before. That one had been assigned to her. This one she'd chosen deliberately at every step that mattered, just as he'd chosen her. So, Glasgow, and enlarging our family it is then, he said simply. Upstairs, the house was full of the ordinary noise of a family in its proper place. Ivy thought about the woman who'd walked out of that hall 9 years ago, with nothing but her dignity and a name she was about to change, and how little that woman could have guessed what she was walking towards. She'd only known she couldn't stay where she wasn't wanted. It turned out that was enough to start with. The end. That was Something Worth Keeping, a KD Starlow story. Ivy Ashford walked out of that meeting hall with nothing but her dignity and a name she was about to change. 9 years later, she had a consultancy, a house with a garden, 2 extraordinary children, and a man who dropped everything the moment she needed him and asked for nothing she wasn't ready to give. Damian got the alliance he chose over his fated mate. He also got the council's sanction, the empty nursery, and the certainty that the woman he'd dismissed as not useful enough had built something he'd never be allowed near. Some rejections are the worst thing that ever happens to you. Some of them are the door you need to walk through. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to KD Starlow, British Dark Fiction, and leave a comment below. I answer every one. Until next time, KD.